Bill Blair, this tool right here, the former Toronto police chief who was in charge during the G20 protest in Toronto. A real stellar job he did there, as I'm sure you all know. Well, this man is now the point man for cannabis legalization in Canada. Ex-police chief Bill Blair to handle Liberals' pot legalization file. Guys, this is absolute madness. Is everyone just forgetting his brutal record as police chief, overseeing the G20 police presence and the response that saw the biggest violation of Canadian rights in history? Our film Into the Fire documents extensively the atrocities that occurred under his watch. Now here's living proof that the federal government is not concerned with ending cannabis prohibition because it violates civil rights, but because it offers them more power and new tax revenue. It is completely hypocritical for this former cop, whose job it was to once enforce prohibition, now to be in charge of what the legal market is going to look like. You know, prostitution is now legal in Canada, and so this is like as if Justin Trudeau was seeking to regulate legal brothels by putting Catholic priests in charge. We need to end the prohibition of cannabis, but this bastardized version of legalization that the Trudeau government is trying to pass off as the real thing was already suspect, because Justin Trudeau has never spoke of the BC cannabis community, instead focusing on how we have to keep it out of the hands of children and organized crime. But clearly, guys, the biggest organized crime is the state itself. As police chief of Toronto, Bill Blair oversaw a record number of gun murders, gang-related crimes, and a number of cannabis-related arrests, which soared from 1,837 in 2005 to 5,610 in just the first 10 months of 2013. With Blair in charge, Toronto police raided impoverished neighborhoods to stop gang violence, but these broad sweeps rounded up many innocent people, or people who are guilty of nothing more than just having cannabis on them. And many of these arrests were tossed out by the courts. Under Blair's regime, the Toronto police started carding and performing street checks, just like in the Middle East or the old Soviet Union or Nazi Germany, where you had to show your papers if the authorities thought you looked suspicious. So you see, Blair only has experience in enforcing bad laws, not creating good ones. And it clearly shows. Blair, just like Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne and various union heads, said that selling cannabis in government-controlled liquor stores is reasonable. I think there are certain modifications or adjustments that may have to make for cannabis as opposed to alcohol, but I think there is already a strong system in place for the control and regulation. And of course, like nearly all cops, his concern is people driving while stoned and how police checkpoints and roads and highways can get more intrusive and invasive to combat this non-issue. You know, smoking and drinking couldn't be more different, and they definitely shouldn't be sold at the same store. The logic behind selling cannabis at liquor stores doesn't even make sense according to Blair's own thinking. He said it's very difficult for minors to walk into a government-owned liquor store and to buy a bottle of booze. You're going to come up against a government employee who got regulations to enforce and is going to ask for identification. And if a person's underage, they're not going to be able to buy that. As if a government bureaucrat can stop underage drinking. Clearly, this man has completely lost touch with reality. If kids want to get booze, they're going to find somebody older to buy it for them. More often than not, that person is the kid's parents. So 18 or 19 years old is a completely arbitrary distinction created by the state. The idea that there's such a thing as minors that the state needs to protect by violating the rights of adults is a false dilemma. Blair quotes a 2014 study by the Center for Addictions and Mental Health that recommended cannabis legalization, but with strict controls. He said, All of that made perfect sense to me as a police chief and as a person responsible for community safety. So what's happening with Justin's legalization here? Well, it's simple. The prohibitionists are now in charge of what the legal recreational market is going to look like. They don't want to treat cannabis for the medicine that it is, and they certainly aren't going to accept the potential of hemp, the ability for this plant to rejuvenate the middle class by providing plastics and fuels and food and clothing and other materials. And so far, there's nothing about Justin's legalization that would be considered lawful in a free society. Blair says, "I'm actually quite confident that we can do a much better job through strict regulation." Guys, does this sound to you like the type of legalization that Colorado experienced? Of course not. This is Canada, where we have a tight group of crony capitalists and bankers and politicians here who fleece the people of their hard-earned wealth through inflation and taxation and strict regulation of commerce. We warned about this in the Trudeau deception. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Harper began this legalization process by setting up the LPs, these licensed producers, and now Justin and Bill Blair are going to finish the process by eradicating the BC bud market and making way for the LP model, this model of total monopolization and total control. The end of prohibition on cannabis is near, and it's about time. Let's just make sure it's the kind of legalization that's going to benefit the people and not the state. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel if you're a new viewer, and be sure to check out our films Into the Fire, which documents chronologically the events that transpired at the G20 summit in Toronto, and also the Trudeau deception, where we laid out all of Trudeau's plans before he was even selected. So thanks again for watching, guys. Stay tuned. We've got more video reports coming soon to pressfortruth.ca.